I don't think Winnie Mandela's story is as simple as black and white. It's not as simple as good or bad. Winnie Mandela had spent almost 20 years out of 21 years either banned, detained, restricted, isolated, or under some kind of surveillance. From the beginning, she had always felt like she had something to prove. Maybe it started where she experienced another black family being humiliated and the family couldn't stand up for themselves. She was powerful. And I think that is why there is still some form of struggle with her legacy today. Nobody comes out of repeated loss a soft person or an untouched person. They always come out tougher. After watching the Trials of Winnie Mandela on Netflix and doing a whole lot of research, some things stood out for me. Not the arrests, not the accusations, not even the violence that became attached to her name. But what stayed with me was how a woman becomes who she eventually becomes. What the years of arrest, isolation, torture, what this does to a woman. There are women history remembers kindly, gently, and then there are women history remembers controversially, almost fearfully. Nomzamo Winifred Madikizela Mandela was one of them. She was popularly known as the mother of the nation. Some people called her dangerous, some people say she was violent, others say she was simply a woman created by violence. But after spending almost 7 hours watching the trials of Winnie Mandela on Netflix and more hours researching about her, I realized something. We can all talk about what Winnie became, but have we asked how she became that person in the first place? That's the part that stayed with me because before the headlines, before the protests, the arrest, before all the controversies, there was just a little girl in rural South Africa trying to understand why the world was so cruel to Black people. I don't want to just sit here and tell you whether Winnie Mandela was a hero or a villain because I don't think that human beings are that simple to understand. Instead, I want us to ask deeper questions. What kind of experiences create a woman who fears absolutely nobody? What happens when someone spends most of their life fighting? And why do society celebrate strong women until those women become too strong to control? If we're going to understand who Winnie Mandela became, we first have to understand the little girl she used to be. Now, before we get into her childhood, let me quickly tell you something that genuinely blew my mind. At a point in her life, Winnie Mandela had spent almost 20 years out of 21 years either banned, detained, restricted, isolated, or under some kind of surveillance. Imagine being watched almost every day of your adult life non-stop for 2 decades. Imagine being arrested so often that you lose count and even going to the courts become part of your life routine. Imagine police raids becoming a normal occurrence in your home. Imagine being feared by an entire government, not one person, not a group of people, but an entire government. That alone tells you Winnie Mandela was not an ordinary woman. That is why when you listen to her speak, she rarely sounds afraid. Broken sometimes, yes. Lonely, definitely. Angry, a lot of time. But afraid, never. And I kept asking myself, who raises a woman like Winnie Mandela? Winnie Mandela was born Nomzamo Winifred Zanyiwe Madikizela on September 26, 1936, in the Transkei region of South Africa. Her name feels symbolic. Nomzamo. It means she who undergoes trial. She who undergoes trial. So imagine carrying that name and then spending almost all your entire life on trial. Just imagine. Doesn't it give you the chills? Like you have that name and then you spend all your entire life on trial. Anyways, she was born into a large family, one of about 9 children or 10, some reports say. and she has always felt like she had something to prove. She described herself as the ignored middle child, which explains a lot. I've read that sometimes children who feel unseen grow up determined to become unforgettable. And Winnie grew up to become unforgettable. Her parents had wanted a boy when her mom was pregnant with her. So, growing up, she knew this and somehow wanted to prove herself and fulfill her parents' wishes. So, she kind of became a tomboy. She fought with sticks, she set traps for animals, she tended to the cattle, she worked on the farm with her dad, and she played rough with boys. One report even said there was a time she made a knuckle duster out of a baking soda and some nails, and she mistakenly struck her sister with it during a quarrel. I feel she was not trying to be rebellious, but deep down, maybe she wanted to prove that she was strong enough. And that theme follows her throughout her entire life, the need to prove strength. Her father, Columbus Madikizela, was a strict man. He was an intellectual and he was deeply proud of the African history. He would read history books to his children, then he would pause halfway and say, "Now, that is what the white man wants us to believe. Let me tell you the real story." Can you imagine growing up hearing that every time your father reads to you? It shapes your mind permanently. It teaches you early that history is political and power controls the narratives. So, listening to this part of the documentary made me realize that Winnie didn't suddenly become political or anti apartheid when she married Nelson Mandela. No, the seeds were already planted long before him, long before the African National Congress, long before all the arrests. At just 9 years old, after the World War II ended, Winnie and her family tried to attend a celebration, but they were denied entry because it was for whites only. Imagine as a child, you realize that your skin alone can exclude you from experiencing a joyous celebration. Just imagine. Another significant story was when she watched a black family being humiliated in a shop. The boy kicked their food, insulted them, and chased them away from the shop. At that point, young Winnie could not understand why the man accepted that humiliation. She could not understand why he would accept to be treated that way. But she also could not understand, most importantly, why her own father did not intervene because he was standing right there when it happened. So I believe that moment stayed with her for the rest of her life because later when people would ask why Winnie was so confrontational, why she refused to submit, why she became like sort of like a militant, maybe part of the answer started there. Maybe it started where she experienced another black family being humiliated and the family couldn't stand up for themselves. And her father watched without doing anything. So she knew she had to stand up for herself. In those moments where she witnessed humiliation, she must have silently just promised herself something. She must have said, "That will never be me." At a young age, Winnie lost her sister to tuberculosis, and shortly after, she lost her mother to the same disease. Before her mother died, her mother had given birth to a baby boy, so Winnie had to help care for him while her mother was sick and also after her mother died. That is a lot for a child to carry. Honestly, it's a lot. After her mother died, Winnie began questioning God, largely because her mother was a fervent believer in God. So she questioned why all these happened despite her mother's belief. I sympathize with her because sometimes grief doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your certainty and it makes you question a lot of things. I think this is important to note because people often describe Winnie as emotionally hard or even lacking emotion. But this is as a result of the loss she experienced and her need for survival. Nobody comes out of repeated loss a soft person or an untouched person. They always come out tougher. Winnie was highly educated. Because she was born before the apartheid fully intensified, she initially received quality education similar to other white students. She excelled academically, she passed with distinction, and she showed leadership qualities very early in her life. Later, she became the first Black medical social worker at Baragwanath Hospital. This is important to note because sometimes people reduce Winnie Mandela to just Mandela's wife. But before the marriage, before the politics, before the controversy, she was already intelligent, ambitious, and well respected. And I think that mattered to her a lot because throughout the documentary, one thing kept coming up repeatedly. She explained how she disliked being reduced to just somebody's wife. She wanted to be seen as Winnie, not an attachment to somebody, but Winnie. There's a moment she shared during the documentary that further explains what shaped her. As a student, one of her teachers quoted Fowler and Smith. Her teacher said, "The unification of Germany, Bismarck believed, could not be attained by parliamentary speeches and debates, but by means of blood and iron." The teacher would now ask her to elucidate. Winnie said the lessons never left her. Years later, she began believing that the systems must be changed, and adopting a peaceful means was rather futile. To her, violence was more likely to yield the desired result. Now, whether people agree with her methods or not is another conversation entirely. But you can slowly start to see how her worldview was formed. It wasn't formed in one instant moment. No, it was formed layer by layer. Humiliation here, loss there, racism here, surveillance here, isolation. The list goes on and on. Eventually, her experiences shaped who she became. While watching this series, I kept thinking about women, particularly women in developing worlds like ours. How often we are expected to endure quietly, to be strong but not too strong, to be bold but still soft enough to be accepted, to be powerful but never threatening. And Winnie Mandela completely rejected that balance. She would not have it. She was loud, she was defiant, she was confrontational, sometimes even problematic, but undeniably, she was powerful. And I think that is why there is still some form of struggle with her legacy today. You see women who suffer quietly, right? Society knows what to do with them. But you see the stronger women who fight back aggressively, they are rare, and most often than not, they do not back down to societal pressures. And so society becomes uncomfortable with them. After watching the documentary and doing more research, I don't think Winnie Mandela's story is as simple as black and white. It's not as simple as good or bad. I think she was a woman shaped by the different stages of her life. So tell me honestly in the comments, do you think society judges powerful women differently from how they judge powerful men? And do you think life's experiences can transform someone so much that they refuse to accept anything else outside what they know? Hit me in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you've stayed till the end, you are awesome and you are officially part of the family. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye bye.